Stephanie Dobson is with us again today. Stephanie is a local lawyer and mediator here in Lloydminster with Hanka Divorce Law and Mediation. And this is another episode of Healthy, Thriving Families in Two Homes. And Stephanie, today we were talking about how we've really kind of dug down deep when it comes to the subject of divorce and separation, but we're going to get a little more generic today and kind of, I guess, keep it wide open. So let's talk about the topics that when people are separating and divorcing that they need to resolve when this process is happening. So let's start with that.
You know, when I was thinking about what we could talk about in today's episode, I was really thinking exactly that, Stacey, that so often we look at specific topics and we really take a deep dive into each of them, but we haven't really looked at that 30,000 foot level of, okay, so I'm separating or I'm facing separation or divorce. What now? What do I do? What kinds of topics do I need to think about? What do I need to consider? And so I sort of look at this as a bit of a 30,000 foot level overview of, looking down. Now, of course, everything is going to be extremely general today. We don't have time for that deep dive when we're looking at this overview. But there's really four things that we would be normally looking at, the topics that we would want to cover. So first, it would be a parenting plan. The second is child support. Third is spousal support, and fourth is your division of assets and debts. So with that whirlwind, let's try to get a little bit into each of them and give our viewers a little glimpse.
All right, well, Stephanie, then let's start talking about the parenting plan. We have spoken a little bit about this in previous episodes, but in essence, what does that mean, generally speaking, to have a parenting plan?
Right. So a parenting plan is basically a guidebook of how you and your other parent are going to parent the children post-separation. And so it contains, of course, a myriad of things. There's some parenting plans that I create that are 1 page long, and there are others that are 30 or more pages long. And so, of course, the level of detail will vary. But there's three main points that you put in every parenting plan. One is the schedule. So we either talk about this regular school-based schedule for parenting or the holiday-based exceptions to parenting, the schedule. The second thing is the decision-making. So how will decisions be made between parents mutually, or some things can be made by one parent or the other. And then third is sometimes we want to develop a communication plan. So communication is one of those big things that a lot of separating families have a hard time with the communication. And so we want to try from the ground level is to try to create a communication plan that will set out for effective communication going forward in two homes.
Well, and the next thing that you mentioned, Stephanie, is child support. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well, our viewers might remember we had an entire 2-part series on child support. So of course, today it's going to be very, very general. But so really just the basics. So there's child support is divided into 2 categories. There's the base support, and then there's the extras. So we look at using the child support guidelines to help us to determine base and the extras for support. But basically for base support, it's based on 4 things. Number 1, the paying parent's income. Number 2, the number of children. Number 3, the province of residence of the paying parent. And number 4, the parenting schedule.
And
then,
sorry, go ahead.
And then just as the final point for those extras, those are the certain categories of expenses, and we don't have time to get into them today, but the categories of expenses that get shared between the parents proportionately to their income.
Well, and speaking of parents, spousal support is another thing that, is obviously a big thing when it comes to separating and to divorcing as well. So how does spousal support work?
So spousal support is an amount that would be paid from one spouse to the other to help them financially post-separation. So there's really 2 questions that we go into with respect to spousal support. The first question is entitlement. Is there a legal entitlement based on the legal principles and the facts of your particular family to an entitlement to actually receiving spousal support? If there is, there's these things called the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines that really will help us on a formulaic basis to figure out how much for how long. So of course, there's so much more to spousal support, but that's the basics.
And now the last thing we're going to discuss today, Stephanie, is a division of assets and debts. And again, we did speak about this previously, but tell us a little bit about that process.
Right. So Division of assets and debts is on what we call the basis of community property. So it's a legal principle called community property. So the way I like to think about it is like a big pot on your stove. And what we're trying to do is we identify all of the assets and debts that each of you owns. So it's anything that the wife owns goes in the pot. Anything that the husband owns goes in the pot in their legal name. Joint ownership goes in the pot. Anything even that's in the kids' names goes in the pot. Once we figure out what's in the pot, then there's certain things called exemptions, and of course, too much detail for today, but then there's things that we take out of the pot called exemptions. So then we divide that pot in two. So in order to figure out what goes in that pot, we need to transparently exchange things. And we talked in another episode about what the heck is disclosure and the exchange of, which is the exchange of documentation between spouses. So you make sure that you transparently disclose everything. And then our job is to create a net worth spreadsheet. And that's basically everything that's in that pot gets listed in our spreadsheet. It gets valued. And then we have to figure out who's keeping what. What's the husband keeping? What's the wife keeping? The goal at the end then is to take those values at the very bottom of the spreadsheet and to say how balanced or imbalanced is the spreadsheet between what the wife is keeping and what the husband is keeping. And then we try to figure out what is that, how do we equalize that, right? And that's where people will use the word settlement payment or equalization payment in a separation or divorce. So right. 30 seconds or less.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much. Once again, there's always just so much to consider in this process, and we really appreciate you going through this and helping our viewers sort through it if unfortunately they're having to go through it. So once again, thank you for joining us, Stephanie, and we'll speak to you again next week.
Thanks, Stacey.